Welcome to Integrating 2Gen Strategies into TANF Programs webinar. My name is Jennifer Dillison, and I am from Kaufman & Associates. I will be your moderator today. I'd like to start by explaining a little bit about the webinar interface. You should all see the first slide of the PowerPoint presentation and the Q&A box on your screen. We will be answering questions at the end of the presentation, but you may enter in a question at any time in the Q&A box. If you need technical assistance during the webinar, please enter a question into the Q&A box. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and all phones have been muted. I will now turn over the webinar to Carol Mizuguchi.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining today's webinar, Integrating 2Gen Strategies into TANF Programs. We are very happy to have a wonderful slate of expert presenters discuss this important topic with you today. So I'm Carol Mizuguchi, and I am Family Assistant Program Specialist with the Office of Family Assistance. This webinar offers us an opportunity to share the latest ideas and practices around two-generation approaches in TANF program integration. As you well know, TANF support and services have traditionally been focused on workforce and education and training for low-income parents, with services such as child care and early education at the discretion of each jurisdiction. More recently, however, the two-generation approach to serving low-income families has gained renewed interest with models focused on combining comprehensive, career-focused employment and training opportunities for parents with educational and enrichment opportunities for their children. The TANF block grant has significant flexibility for jurisdictions to take a proactive role in implementing such approaches outside of cash assistance, which equals only 26.5% of federal and state funds in fiscal year 2014. However, just over half of TANF jurisdictions, 28 states, and the District of Columbia spent more than 50% of their TANF and state maintenance of effort funds on the combination of basic assistance, work-related activities, and child care in fiscal year 2014. While the importance of policies and practices that foster two-generation approaches has been generally established, feedback from many of you on a previous OFA Tier TA webinar, Breaking the Poverty Cycle and Opening Doors to Opportunities for TANF Families, posted in May 2015, suggested limited knowledge about two-generation approaches to alleviating poverty and a lack of implementation knowledge as the biggest barriers for TANF programs considering implementing a two-generation approach to services. So our conversation today will go beyond the question of whether the two-generation approaches achieve better outcomes for families, but providing insight into what an intentional two-generation approach might look like in the context of your own TANF program. Our initiatives today include understanding the two-generation continuum and the components of an intentional two-generation approach at both a programmatic and a policy level. Hearing experiences and lessons learned from programs serving TANF families that are in various stages of integrating a two-generation approach, and having the opportunity to engage with these programs in a virtual town hall setting. We'll also identifying where your own TANF program stands on the two-generation continuum and learning more about tools and resources available to your program and furthering pathways to self-sufficiency for the whole family. We are very fortunate to have 6 knowledgeable presenters who will guide our conversation today about integrating two-generation strategies into TANF programs. Throughout the presentation, you will have an opportunity to ask questions through the chat box in the bottom left corner of your screen. We encourage you to actively participate and ask questions during the town hall segment of the webinar. And if your questions are for a specific presenter or program, we ask that you please specify that. If we do not get to everyone's questions, we will provide a question and answer that will appear on the Peer TA website, along with a transcript and audio recording of today's webinar. During the webinar, there will also be a series of polling questions that will appear on your screen. Please answer each by clicking on the radio button next to your selected response. Doing so will not only help us guide the discussion today, but it will also share additional information that may inform your practice. Sorry, I'm going the wrong way. So we will first hear Monica Barzak. Dr. Monica Barzak is a senior advisor on two-generation approaches and the White House Full Council Rural Impact Two-Generation Demonstration Project Initiative, working with both the Office of Family Assistance and the Office of Community Services at the Administration for Children and Families in Washington, D.C. Monica joined AFC leading the development of CAP Tulsa's Innovation Lab and was at the forefront of the lab's efforts to bring the two-generation vision to life at CAP Tulsa by working across the agency to strengthen program offerings for parents, developing a comprehensive family success plan that helps families develop a path to achieve goals, and pushing the efforts to integrate offerings for children and parents by opening new lines of communication within the agency and training staff on the two-generation philosophy. After Monica, we will hear from Connecticut, and so from Connecticut we have Stephen Hernandez, who is the Director of Public Policy and Research with the Connecticut Commission on Children. Stephen is responsible for developing policy proposals on a range of children's issues. This includes working with representatives of all branches of government and private groups to promote public policies in the best interest of children, identifying emerging issues and policy trends, and enlisting the support of leaders in non-government sectors to improve services and policies for children. Mr. Hernandez previously served 7 years as Legislative and Budget Director in the Office of Washington, D.C. for Council Member Jim Graham. He will be joined by Peter Palomino, Program Manager of the State Connecticut Department of Social Services and Economic Security Unit. Connecticut is one of 8 jurisdictions that was selected to participate in OFA's Strengthening Systems to Family Stability National Policy Academy. And Connecticut has specified the development and implementation of two-generation approaches into TANF programs. So OFA, I don't know if many of you know this, is currently in month 10 of the 18-month Policy Academy. We're also joined by Utah, and here representing Utah today, we have Sisifo Tatiti, and I hope I didn't mess up her name. She is the TANF Program Manager at the Utah Development of Workforce Services. In 2012, the Utah legislature passed the Intergenerational Poverty Migration Act, requiring multiple state agencies to work together to gather data around intergeneration poverty in families, and its Mitigation Act, This research effort showed that a whole family focus was critical to reducing the incidence of children in Utah who remain in the cycle of poverty and welfare dependency as they became adults. And the Next Generation Kids pilot program was created as a result. Joining Ms. Sisyphus is Tracy McGruder, and Tracy is, Tracy is the current director of the Office of Child Care and Senior Advisor for the Intergenerational Poverty Initiative. Tracy's professional career has been focused on achieving positive results for vulnerable families. Prior to joining CWS, Tracy worked at Voices for Utah Children as a senior policy analyst and director of state fiscal policy. In that capacity, she researched issues related to poverty, fiscal policy, and strategies to reduce poverty, including two-generation approaches for families in poverty. Her work experience also includes serving as a budget analyst in the Illinois Senate, overseeing a public employee retiree organization, and administering the Utah State Bar's new lawyer training program. She received her JD from Illinois Institute of Technology and Chicago-Kent College of Law, and her undergraduate degree is from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And last but not least, we have Dr. Sharon McGruder, who is with the National Governors Association Center for Best Practices. She's the program director of the National Governors Association Center for Best Practices Economic, Human Services, and Work Development Division. The NGA Center for Best Practices Economic, Human Services, and Workforce Division provides information, research, policy analysis, technical assistance, and resource development for governors and their staff across a range of policy issues, including intergenerational poverty. While the federal TANF block grant legislation offers flexibility for jurisdictions to align programs and policies for children and their parents through two-generation approaches, NGA recognizes that a successful two-generation approach must involve strategic collaboration across public programs at the state and local policy level. Wow, so as you can see, we have, there's lots of knowledge on the phone on this webinar this afternoon, so we're very, very fortunate. And now I will go to the first full question for the audience. How knowledgeable are you now about two-generation approaches to alleviating poverty? Your first question. So it looks like a good percentage of the audience. We're at 58. It's good. So by the end, I'm sure you guys will have increased knowledge. And then this second polling question that we have is, has your TANF program requested technical assistance on two-generation approaches since OFA's May 2015 webinar? So the majority of our audience responded no. Great. So thank you for your responses. And at this time, I will now turn the presentation over to our town hall facilitator, Monica Barzat. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Carol, and welcome to everyone on the webinar today. I'm going to give a bit of a quick overview of 2Gen. It seems like most of you have some knowledge, although you're probably being modest in calling it limited. And perhaps many of you were on a webinar last year, so this may be new or not new to you, and I'll try to accommodate all audiences. So, Carol, can you go to the next slide or tell me how I go to the next slide? Thank you. I do want to spend a few minutes on this slide, which is relatively new information. And this comes out of the fact that the Administration for Children and Families actually, in its strategic plan, has 2-generation efforts as a goal in there. And so in thinking about what ACS means by 2-generation, when you look across the wide range of programs that ACS administers, in concert with the Office of Family Assistance, the Office of Community Services, and the Acting Assistant Secretary, Mark Greenberg, the Administration for Children and Families is rolling out a definition that makes sense for us as a government entity. So most definitions would agree that 2-generation approaches meet the needs of children and their parents together, and that really is the highest level, kind of top view of what 2Gen means. So here ACS is making a statement that we bring a 2-generation philosophy to our efforts, and we work to support and advance 2-generation approaches through research, technical assistance, and program and policy guidance. If you could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. The previous slide. Thank you. Okay. The one that you keep flying by. Yeah, stop. Great, thanks. Okay, so I'm not going to read all of this. You have the slides or can get the slides and can take a closer look at this. But I did want to point out that in addition to the definition, ACS is rolling out what you might call principles and commitments to serving children and parents together to support human capital development, family stability, and the development of social capital, with an equal commitment to supporting 2-generation research. So that's kind of essentially what all of these bullet points say, and you can look later at your leisure. The next slide, please. So I'm sure if you've seen 2-generation in the past, you've probably seen this diagram. This comes from Ascend at the Aspen Institute. And it's just sort of one depiction of the 2-generation, what you might call a 2-generation continuum. And so most TANF programs are over on the right-hand side. They are parent-focused programs. And in a 2-generation approach, a program such as TANF would begin to ask itself, how could it start moving more towards the left, towards a whole family approach? And so a parent-focused program would start layering in or linking and aligning with child-centered programs. And programs that begin on the left side, such as Head Start or child care programs, ask themselves how they can start linking and layering in parent-centered programs to move to a whole family approach. And I'll reference this later, but I'll give a little shout out to the new TANF ACF-IM 2016-03 that came out about 2 weeks ago that provides some really good, I think, guidance as to how TANF programs in particular can start moving towards a 2-generation approach. And that IM, I think, still for the time being is on OFA's homepage, but certainly it's archived in the IM library. Next slide, please. So 2-generation, just very quickly, I want to highlight two things. It's not necessarily about building new programs, and it's not asking any particular program to offer all the components of the model. It really is about a new way of thinking about how you do business, and in particular, how the alignment and coordination of services for parents and kids is put on the systems on the programs and taken off of the family. So right now, it really is up to the family to go to all the different programs that they might be eligible for or need and figure out how to knit them together. And 2Gen really just sort of turns that on its head and asks the programs and systems to do that work in advance. Next slide. Again, this is from Ascend at the Aspen Institute. It's just one way to think about the kind of core components of a two-generation model. And I would say it's highly idealized. There are few, if any, two-gen programs out there, at least that I'm aware of, that offer all of these components. But the field certainly thinks about how a two-gen program would link services for children, such as early childhood education or child health and well-being programs, with services for parents, such as post-secondary opportunities, employment pathways, economic support, and social capital. Okay, next slide. Thank you. So just going to take a few minutes to talk about how TANF in particular, but other programs within Administration for Children and Families might be able to embrace a two-generation approach. Four sort of buckets we could think about this. One is sort of the flexibility of funding. The second is sort of budget proposals, and there are a few two-generation flavored proposals in the President's SY 2017 proposal that is currently working its way through Congress. Technical assistance, guidance and research, and partnerships. Next slide. So just taking the TANF example, and Carol alluded to this in her opening, if we think about the TANF core benefits and services, they really are what the main purposes of TANF have been about basic assistance to needy families, work-related activities, and child care. But just under 50%, or just under half, of the $31.9 billion in federal TANF and state maintenance of effort funds are spent on these three activities. So there's a lot of room, a lot of flexibility in TANF to both increase those percentages, particularly with work-related activities, but also weaving in the child care and funds to do the coordination that's required to link programs for children and families. Next slide. So the second bucket might be looking at how could the federal budget support two-generation approaches. Right now, the Department of Labor issued a competitive grant process for $25 million called the Strengthening Working Families Initiative. That window for applications has closed, but that will award funds for communities to link adult education and workforce development with quality child care. Rural Impact is a current ongoing two-generation demonstration project in 10 rural communities that offers technical assistance to those communities to build two-generation approaches. The proposed budget, as I mentioned before, includes $100 million for two-generation demonstration projects through the TANF program, so that will be of particular interest to many of you on the call today. It also includes $20 million from the U.S. Department of Agriculture for two-generation rural child poverty demonstrations, and $16 million for schools operated by the Bureau of Indian Education for early childhood parent involvement models. So that's through the federal budget. Next slide, please. Here's a list of many of the technical assistance opportunities that have been provided to federal grantees. And I just really want to commend the Office of Family Assistance and TANF in particular for really having embraced the two-generation approach and mindset, and you can see many of these technical assistance activities have come through OFA aimed at TANF in particular. And so that's really working to build the capacity of federal staff, state, tribal, territory, TANF agencies, and local TANF agencies. Next slide. ACF also has issued and will issue additional guidance So my opening slides about the ACF definition of two generation and the principles and commitments, that is sort of referencing that first bullet point there. I mentioned the information memorandum that came out for two generation approaches in TANF. We will be issuing an information memorandum for the Community Services Block Grant as well. We will be issuing from the Acting Assistant Secretary, we will be issuing a letter to Human Services Commissioners, followed up by conference call and webinars to further engage regional administrators and regional staff who already have had opportunities to participate in two generation webinars. So you can see there's sort of a whole strategy here at ACF to push out this notion of two generation and provide the kinds of assistance that might be needed. Next slide. And all of this is undergirded by a commitment to two generation research. These are just three current projects that have a two generation flavor that are being led by the Office of Planning and Research Evaluation here at Administration for Children and Families. So they relate to Head Start, or using Early Head Start as a two-gen platform, Head Start as a two-gen platform, and then a really exciting project getting underway that's a comprehensive literature review, and I would say a scan of the two-gen environment to point towards future evaluation and research. Next slide. I just will close by emphasizing, at least for the Office of Family Assistance, which is probably where most of you work, emphasizing that first priority for this year. Two generation is a high priority going forward. I think it should provide some confidence for us to pay time and attention to this kind of work. And so not only really coming with support from the Administration for Children and Families, but also the Office of Family Assistance. I have two slides in here that, Carol, if you can just maybe punch through. These are resources that you can feel free to access at your leisure that are some of the foundational documents for two generations, as well as some that are specifically aimed at TANF policies and a TANF audience. Just wanted to kind of give you a little limited bibliography on that. And then my contact information is at the end if you have additional questions later that we're not able to get to during the Q&A period. Thank you.
Thank you, Monica. So now we'll have our next third polling question. Where does your TANF program fall on the two-generation continuum? And Monica had a wonderful graphic of the continuum that you have choices on your screen there. So it appears that the majority of the audience, over half, are pretty much their TANF programs are parent-focused with child elements. Okay, so our next presenters are from Connecticut, so I will turn it over to, so my slides are out of order. I don't know.
Utah should go first before Connecticut.
Okay. Well, Utah, you're up.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Carol, and allowing Utah the opportunity to talk about where we are at currently in our two-generation work. My name is Tracy Gruber, and I'm going to be joined by Sosifo Ta'atiti to talk about our work and where we've been. We're just going to take 10 minutes to talk about our path to two-gen, our current demonstration project, and incorporating lessons learned from that demonstration project into our case management system. Next slide, please. And one more, please. our work in the 2-gen arena started back in 2011 and 12 when the economic recovery started to take place in Utah. And we were seeing our TANF caseloads decline. In 2012, the Utah legislature adopted the Intergenerational Poverty Mitigation Act, which required the state of Utah to look at its public assistance roles and determine whether or not there was an issue in our state with intergenerational poverty. The other thing that legislation did was require all of the state agencies involved in the Intergenerational Poverty Initiative to look at its program policies, procedures, and determine whether or not changes need to be made in order to meet the goal of the Intergenerational Poverty Mitigation Act, which is to reduce the number of children in Utah experiencing intergenerational poverty. And with that analysis and internal analysis led us to review our TANF Cash Assistance Program, which is called our Family Employment Program. And when we looked at our Family Employment Program with the new information that we had from the intergenerational poverty research, we realized that the time had come for us to focus not simply on the parents and getting the parent employed, but to look at the whole family. The intergenerational poverty research was showing us that there are significant barriers and challenges that families face, and in order to address those barriers and challenges for the entire family, we needed to approach our family employment program a little bit differently. And that led us to analyzing our family employment program through a 2-generational lens and serving the whole family while maintaining our primary objective, which was to get the parents employed and meeting all of the requirements of the TANF program. Next slide, please. The main program that has come out of this, or the main demonstration project, I should say, that has come out of this is a very, very small demonstration project that we've launched in 3 communities that the research and data showed us had the most significant numbers of children and families experiencing intergenerational poverty. The name of that demonstration project we dubbed Next Generation Kids. In this slide, provides a visual of what our 2-generation demonstration program looks like. We did not make significant changes to the requirements of the family employment program, but what we did do was we started focusing our case management plan within 4 areas of child well-being that we are doing all of our intergenerational poverty research in, and those are the areas of early childhood development, education, family economic stability, and health. And we've added a family success coach who oversees that case management plan. They develop the case management plan with the family at the center, and they communicate and coordinate with other state agencies that are also serving the needs of the families and leveraging community resources to get the families the services that they need to put them on a path to self-sufficiency. Next slide, please. The effort around Next Generation Kids is really focused on outcomes, and we have spent a lot of time figuring out what those outcomes are and trying to measure them. And I've got some examples here, and I will say that these are more outputs than outcomes, but it's just an illustration of some of the data that we are keeping track of that looks at outcomes both from the child's perspective as well as the parent's perspective, and incorporates all 4 of those areas of child well-being that the effort is taking place in. Next slide, please. The first slide was the child outcomes. This slide is some of the adult outcomes, and it gives just a sense. We have others in each of those areas, about 3 or 4 in each area of child well-being that we're keeping track of. Next slide, please. At this point, I'll turn the time over to CFO, who will talk about how we're incorporating the lessons learned from our Next Generation Kids demonstration project into our TANF case management plan.
Perfect. Thanks, Tracy. Appreciate that intro. And it's good to be with all of you today. So our family-focused case management is a strategy that we implemented this year. We started working on it about over a year ago, even prior to our involvement in the academy. It was more of a concept at the time before we got involved with the academy, but with the help of the academy, and I'm referencing the TANF Systems to Family Stability Academy that we're involved with. With the technical assistance we've received through the academy, we've been able to launch forward and implement some of these strategies. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about it. Historically, some of you may know, we work closely with the Social Research Institute out of the University of Utah. They've been doing a longitudinal study on our Family Implement Program, or our TANF program, for quite some time, over 15 years. And so based on the data that we've been collecting through that longitudinal study, and looking at other concepts like implementation science, we realized that while we had the best intentions of getting parents employed and participating per the work participation requirements, we weren't really training our staff the best way that we could. And what I mean is a lot of times, and you may relate to this, we were training staff anytime we had a new policy or a new strategy. We would go out, we would train them, one and done, we'd expect them to implement it. We were finding that wasn't effective. And so we reached out to the Social Research Institute again. They came out, they presented on implementation science, and we figured this was something that we could use. And basically, it's really slowing down the process of training staff so that it's not a one and done, it's more methodical, it's having a plan, it's having training, follow-up training, measuring, the efficacy of the trainings and things like that. So we've used implementation science throughout this process. We created several work groups that involve different levels, staffing levels in the department, from management all the way down to front-level workers, our case managers. And we pulled together several people from across the state into 6 different work groups. We had a policy work group, a case management work group, a training work group, training meaning they would help develop the training modules and actually train our staff, a community connections or resources work group, a customer education work group to look at all of our forms and the way that we were conducting our orientations for our program, and then we had another work group for internal communication. And so these work groups are ongoing. As we've begun to roll out all of the different trainings, and I'll show you that on the next slide, our work groups are continuing to improve or look at our processes, look at our policies, and weave in some of the principles that we're teaching our staff. And so I think it'll make a little bit more sense in the next slide. And then thank you. Before we go to the next slide, just really quickly, we designed our training around an academy structure. And so all of our staff statewide get trained face-to-face, which I think is really important and part of implementation science. They get the training in small groups and face-to-face. And I know that's not always doable in every state, given whether you're a single state or county administered, but here in Utah, that was something that we could manage, and we found that it's been an effective way to train our staff so far. And then the third thing that we're looking at is measurements and outcomes. I'm not going to get too much into that. That's something that we're still getting some technical assistance through the academy, and something that we could probably speak to in a future webinar. But due to the lack of time, I'll go on to the next slide. So you'll see can you go back one? So you'll see on the second box below, those are the different training modules that we've created for our staff. The first one, coaching training, we required that all of our staff, all of our supervisors and managers be trained on the modules before the staff actually get it. And this is also part of implementation science, so that the supervisors and the managers would already be familiar, would already have heard the content, would already have been trained on it, so that when they go through the training again, face-to-face with their staff, that they would be able to help as a coach and be able to do follow-up activities with their staff. So every month before we implement a new training, we have all the staff, all the supervisors and managers come together. We also have all of our program specialists and all of our licensed clinical therapists go through the training as well. We also, like I said, we also make sure we have follow-up activities each week. So everyone gets trained once a month face-to-face, and then each week after they're trained, they receive a follow-up training. And that could be an hour's worth of in the staff meeting of reviewing the training, doing a worksheet or watching a case video or staffing cases, just depending on what it is that they learned in the last training. And then the modules that we're actually training on are Intro to Human Development, Case Management, Motivational Interviewing. We have 3 segments, 1, 2, and 3. We have Case Management 1, 2, and 3, Executive Functioning, and Trauma Awareness. This whole year is a year of training for our staff, and so each month they're either getting one training, and then they, excuse me, we bring in professionals from the University of Utah to help with our motivational interviewing training. We wanted to make sure that they were credible trainers and presenters, and we ensured that they understood our business and the way that the language that we use, how we communicate with our customers. And so they've tailored the principles of motivational interviewing to really speak to our case managers, and so that's been effective as well. We also brought in a retired professor from the University of Utah to do our Intro to Human Development and Case Management. So that was also a good thing for us. All in all, I mean, there's so much to say about what we've been doing. We are in our 3rd month of training, and we anticipate our training going all the way up through November. And we've had a good experience, positive experience so far. Our staff, the feedback we've been getting is that this is what they've needed and wanted for a long time. And with our 2-generation approach to our TANF program, we feel that if we're asking the right questions, if we're building those trusting relationships with our customers and our parents, and we're asking questions about their children and showing that we're concerned not just about getting them, to complete their participation requirements, but that we're actually concerned about their family and their well-being, that we're going to have better outcomes than we've ever seen before. So I know our time is done, so with that, I'll end. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So next, we have Connecticut. And so I'll turn it over to Mr. Hernandez.
Thank you. This is Steve Hernandez, the Commission on Children here in Connecticut. If you move to the next slide, and the next after that, you'll see that most of what's been discussed in either Utah or some of the foundational principles of 2Gen have really been thought about and adopted in the state of Connecticut from the policy level. How is it that we wrap policy around principles of 2Gen and then have not only program follow but agency collaboration, all of which, of course, is revolving around the family as center. So some of the principles and some of the core strategies that we thought to engage in the state of Connecticut was focusing not only on low-income families, of course, because that's where the need was, and, of course, having a shared portal of entry for both parent and child. That was critical because what we've done in the past in the state of Connecticut is treat the parent, treat the child, but not at the same time in the same place in a coordinated way. And as part of our principles and objectives for the state, we also wanted to focus on learning, work, and building family strength, so strengthening the family unit. So what we thought around these principles, if you go to the next slide, please. And if you think about those principles, we started to align our policy around 2Gen, and then the way that we are operating here is that TANF follows the principle. So TANF funds follow the principle of 2Gen. And of course, we know that as we examined how, as a state, our policies, our TANF policies, had developed over time or perhaps not developed, we realized that there were so many opportunities that were embedded in federal opportunity that we weren't using maximally because we weren't focusing on family. So in terms of our Connecticut principles and our objectives, we thought to offer dignity and authentic commitment to diversity. Now, by dignity, we mean a voice to diverse population, whether it be demographically or socioeconomically. And you'll find that what we did in Connecticut, we have 6 sites that were chosen from around the state, and the sites are as diverse as the state itself. In fact, we have a rural site, we have several urban and suburban sites as well that integrate these principles in different ways along the same principles. We also wanted to make sure that we had a context for peer-to-peer learning, and what that means is that we're with parents as partners and agencies as collaborators in this work. We wanted to make sure that we were learning from each other across families, across agency, and across jurisdictions, so that one town in implementing was learning from another town, and that's how we have rolled out the implementation of our state policy. Very importantly, we wanted to link both fathers and mothers, and that is custodial and non-custodial fathers. That is something that as the state, we decided was a priority in truly bringing families together. We heard all throughout our state as we were in our early stages of creation of policy and implementation that fathers, and especially non-custodial fathers, wanted to have a stake in the lives of their children, and we were sure to extend that. And finally, value the family over standard protocols. This has been especially important in implementation. And, we are in the relatively early stages of implementation of our 6 pilot sites. And, of course, these pilot sites are communities of learning. But what we have seen immediately is that our old way of doing things, the way that we either procure, that we establish contract, that we communicate between agencies, our standard way of doing things don't necessarily conform around the principles of 2Gen. So it has been in some ways like remolding a square peg into a round hole, so that we are actually reinventing in some ways and reinvigorating in others systems around 2-generational strategies. If you go to the next slide, please. And then finally, this really does show what a 2-generational strategy, at least from the point of view in Connecticut, has been, with the family self-sufficiency, as has been said, at the core, at the center of the strategy. Policies, programs, and systems aligning around the goal of family self-sufficiency. And, of course, thinking of outcomes that are related to school readiness, to literacy, both in the family in its entirety, in a 2-generational literacy, family engagement, and social capital. Family engagement being really family participation and treating the family as a co-partner in this work. If you go to the next slide, please. And again, this slide also is emblematic of how the work works here. So I will let you digest the slide in your own time. But if you go to the next slide. So finally, as the state of Connecticut has always, through either the work of the Commission on Children or the work through our state agencies, have considered parents as partners for change. Without parents as true partners, change at the family level can't really happen. And without parents as true partners, change at the agency level and how we are used to doing business really can truly be informed. So what we ensured and what we have ensured in the implementation of the new state policy around 2Gen is that parents are engaged. They're engaged in the planning. They are considered the assets that they are. Low-income parents especially are assets in this work because they are informants, core informants in the needs of the family and in the needs of how to bring continuous and coordinated care for parents and children. And finally, community messengers, especially in our idea of community learning and community exchange and learning through experience. The parents really are the messengers to the rest of the community. Whether we are exploiting existing communication between families and existing community communication, or helping foster that community within the two-generational work. And again, both fathers and mothers are important, whether it be custodial or non-custodial parents and fathers. And the teen perspective, we thought, was also critical because teens bring specific and important components that are unique to the experience of the teenager, whether it be teens that are facing particular challenges in their pathway to career, whether it be teens that are facing early parenting issues, or teens that are focused on improving their workforce outcomes. Teens are an important component, and again, non-custodial parents critical to our work. If you go to the next slide, please. This will give you a little bit of an example of what it is that we're dealing with in the state of Connecticut in terms of the gap between what it costs to live in the state of Connecticut and what our typical worker with a high school diploma earns in the state of Connecticut. And the income gap in the state of Connecticut really does paint the picture of the challenge that our families are facing in our state and in states similarly situated around the country. Next slide, please. So, as I said, we are now in the implementation stages of really dynamic legislation that started with two-generational policy at its core. So, rather than focus on TANF itself as the vehicle, it is our thinking around 2Gen that is the vehicle that informs how it is that we utilize local and federal resource. Again, you'll see you'll see resonance in this slide to some of the things that I've mentioned before. The key here is the learning community of these chosen pilot sites around the state of Connecticut, and this is an intentional strategy to really have communities learn from each other. Whether it is through a shared understanding, shared resource in some cases, but really the best resource is communication on whatever roadblocks or whatever core strategies for movement have been adopted or created in communities. And ultimately, our goal here is that the state of Connecticut is the ultimate recipient of the learning that we are experiencing in the 6 sites. This is an intentional trickle-up strategy of learning the ins and outs of how it is that you implement 2Gen policy at the structural level that will really help us move this work forward in the state. Next slide, please. And again, here we talk about the 6 pilots. We talk about the various the foci of the pilots, and you'll see even through our focus, our elemental focus on, for instance, early learning programs, housing, you see that it is all of these focus areas are around the family, wrapped around the family. And finally, as part of this work and as part of coordinating these systems, that is how we then learn to best utilize our TANF funds and other federal resources as well. So you'll see that part of the plan for moving forward here is to learn how we best maximize not only federal funds, but also state grants and private donations for continuing two-generational planning. Next slide, please. And finally, some other components of the system include a workforce liaison because, again, as we treat the family as a unit, we treat the elements together of the necessary work here. So we treat the workforce needs of the family, we evaluate the outcomes for children, parent, and family within these systems. And again, this is a 3-branch strategy. We need to include in this work not only our partners in judiciary, but our partners in the legislature and the partners in the executive to ensure that we are aligning policy with practice, with justice in ways that are family focused and pro-family. Next slide, please. And finally, my colleague Peter Palomino will discuss ACF Connecticut TANF Academy project, which is part of this work in the state of Connecticut.
Thanks, Steve, and good afternoon to everybody. I serve as a TANF administrator in Connecticut, And I'm sure, like my colleagues across the country, the 2Gen buzzword is very prominent in any of the meetings that we attend. I went to a homeless workshop the other day, and I was barraged with questions about 2Gen and what we're doing to support that. So it's clearly an important topic, and we're trying to address it as best we can within our TANF funds. I want to give a shout-out to ACF in terms of the work they're doing nationally, and also as part of this academy project that Connecticut was successful in being one of the 8 selected states. We're learning a lot from that in terms of Utah. We've had conference calls with them. Actually, when the 2Gen legislation was being adopted last July, we were in Washington learning about 2Gen, and we had actually proposed in our TANF Academy application that we would do a significant project with 2Gen and focus on non-custodial parents. The target around that is because we also have a strong fatherhood program, and that was also an important component for ACF. So we've been working on what I call a subsequent pilot to the 6 that Steve addressed, focusing on non-custodial parents, and we know that's a tough, difficult group to work with. We've identified a community action agency in one part of Connecticut, and just to give you a real simple example, they operate an early childhood program, they operate a fatherhood program, and they also operate a employment and training program along with an energy assistance program, but no way were they looking at contacting dads within each of the organizations or collecting data and trying to bring together the kids and the parents. And so we have a great opportunity to examine this and work forward with this particular group. Fortunately, being part of the TANF Academy gives us access to national consultants. That's very, very helpful. We're going to align some of those national consultants with our Connecticut 2Gen in the hopes that we learn together. So we don't have anything to report as much as Utah was able to share information on their small pilot, but we think we're prepared to add to the research to hopefully have some evidence-based information that we can share with ACF and other colleagues across the country. And when I answered those questions, I have limited knowledge about 2Gen. I'm learning a lot, and we have been parent-focused. And so our thinking and thought process has been expanded significantly since we joined the TANF Academy. So again, kudos to ACF for providing those opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you. Very informative. And now we'll hear from our final panelist, Sharon.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me today, and I'm learning a lot as well. This has been really helpful. While I wait for the slides to come up here, I just want to say that my understanding is that all these slides will be on the Peer TA network, and folks will talk about that afterward. So especially since a lot of, I think, what folks have talked about, I'm going to skip through some of my slides that might seem to duplicate in the interest of time so that we can make sure we have enough time for questions. So I just want to give an overview. At NGA, we work with states, the governors. They are our constituents, as well as their policy advisors from the governor's office, as well as senior officials leading and directing agencies, such as the folks we've heard from today from Connecticut and Utah. And so we meet their needs. They have policy issues that they're working on. They have strategies they're trying to work through, and we help them do that. And a main way that we do that is we convene and we bring information to bear, research, and we facilitate peer sharing across states, as you're hearing from Connecticut and Utah. Exciting things going on. And so in general, 2Generation for NGA is sort of a no-brainer. It's really a useful way for us to frame our work both with our constituents and with our funders around family economic security and child well-being, and to help governors move forward policy and better support their residents in those areas. We're trying to figure out and share federal opportunities that align with adopting a 2Gen approach to serving low-income families. So, again, opportunities in TANF, current flexibilities, as well as we've heard, in the president's budget, some things that may come to pass. WEOL legislation has passed and required that they coordinate with TANF around employment. child care development block grant, new guidelines and regulations there that can be leveraged at the state level through a two-generation lens. So we try to bring these ideas and these learnings to the states to move forward in this area. And of course, two-generation really resonates with our constituents around ensuring efficient and effective government. And it really is, I think, today, one of the rare topical areas that really is bipartisan. I think from wherever a state is coming from, they will find value in adopting a two-generation approach to serving families. So one thing I want to clarify, and again, we've heard this already today, but as you know and you've heard, two-generation programs are the services on the ground, and they really strive to be comprehensive and coordinated, seamless service delivery for whole families, and often focusing at the very least around parental employment and early childhood education or child care. But of course could expand beyond that. We've heard, Connecticut and Utah doing things around family literacy and mental health, child well-being, and many other areas. So I think especially as the Connecticut folks, we're starting to talk about, when you think about two-generation policy and what structurally and at the systems level does two-generation policy look like, that's what we've been struggling with and trying to bring to our constituents to think about what they could do at the state level with the levers that the governors and the agency leaders have to really adopt a two-generation lens and approach in all of the work that they do. And then, of course, the state policy lens focuses on what governors and state legislatures can do. And again, I'm representing the governors and what they can do today, but we clearly coordinate closely with NCSL and other national organizations that work with legislators. So I just wanted to orient you that my presentation goes both beyond TANF, and I'm going to talk to you about what state leaders are thinking in a variety of policy areas when they think about two-generation. And I'm also going beyond programs and really thinking at the policy level. So my presentation today, as I mentioned, I think I'm just going to talk to you about where the states are with respect to two-generation state policy across a number of policy areas. And this is both with respect to awareness, current opportunities that they foresee, and the emerging ideas and actions that they would like to take. And I'll just tell you right now, states are really just at the beginnings of thinking about this. And I know folks like Connecticut and Utah who've had the opportunity to work with OSA and receive some other technical assistance has really moved them forward. I know they themselves would probably say they'd love to be much further along, but they really are helping other states think about what they might do and help them envision what they could do. And so I'd like to thank them personally for actually sharing their efforts today and with NGA constituents throughout their learnings. And then I'm going to close with just announcing a two-generation technical assistance opportunity for states, pretty similar to what OSA has been offering and working with the 8 states on, but it'll be a little bit broader, and I'll get to that. So what I really want to focus on is we had a meeting in just within the last month or so in Salt Lake City, and we convened, the idea was to convene state officials, gubernatorial, senior level officials around what is two-generation state policy, what is the potential, and what might you start thinking about that you could do in your state. So the goal was to really raise awareness, to get people thinking in this way, first and foremost, at the state policy level, and then to highlight current state policy efforts as well as federal opportunities to advance two-generation approaches at the state level. And we clearly located in Utah. We drew heavily from what they were learning and what they've shared with you today. We had Connecticut represented in many other states who are already moving forward in this direction. And then we work with states to at least start to identify whether it's low-lying fruit or some goals that they would like to pursue in starting to infuse a two-generation lens into their state policy work. And so I'll share with you some of what we learned there. Basically, we had officials from 22 states and 1 territory join us at this meeting in Salt Lake City. And those Governor Gary Herbert and Lieutenant Governor Spencer Cox was able to join us, which was wonderful. And it also included 16 policy advisors from governor's offices. So these are the folks that are squarely in the governor's office, and they could be advising on education policy, workforce policy, human services policy, you name it, child care policy. So we had great representation from very senior leaders across a number of policy areas at this meeting. We also had senior officials from a variety of policy areas. So we had commissioners, directors, and secretaries, cabinet-level secretaries of human services agencies, 20 were able to attend. I mentioned the policy advisors from governor's offices. We had senior officials in workforce and economic development represented, as well as officials more in the health and human services space, as well as health officials and education officials. So we were very pleased to get such a cross-policy representation. And in fact, I'll give this one example. We cited state teams. So each of the 22, 23 states brought 3 to 4 representatives from their states. And in one case, we were able to play matchmaker between a senior policy advisor in the state's office around health policy, a senior agency official in education, and a senior workforce official. They had never met previously, and boy, did they just gangbusters get to know each other and just brainstorm how they could better work together across agencies adopting this lens. Like you all did at the beginning part of this webinar, we also did a sort of a polling to see where states were. And I think very similar to what we found here, half the state participants were familiar with the concept of 2Gen, but really hadn't made any progress or plans, and they were just coming to learn. Another quarter had begun planning or developing 2-generation efforts and wanted ideas about what more they could do. And then another 22% had 2-generation efforts in place and wanted to take them to the next level. And I would hazard a guess that Connecticut and Utah were in that group. And then we actually had 2 officials who attended who were not familiar at all with the concept of 2Gen. So we were grateful that they even took a chance to come to figure out what in the heck that was. We also asked them, in what policy areas are you interested in adopting a 2-generation lens or bringing together, cross-agency collaboration around 2-generation? And most of them, you could see, said early childhood education, child care, Head Start, and then very close behind were workforce, home visiting, and TANF. So you can see where TANF falls in terms of the lens that these officials, again, and these officials were outside of human services, not just TANF, but they certainly saw the critical role that TANF played in whatever 2-generation strategy or set of efforts they would like to adopt. And then you can see also represented SNAP, health and mental health, child welfare, K-12 education, youth services in general, housing, and then post-secondary education, and there were some others that people wrote in. We also asked what challenges were they either currently experiencing if they were doing work in this area, or did they foresee in adopting 2-generation approaches? And at the very top, not surprising to anybody on the phone, I would imagine, is how do you integrate funding? How do you grade and blend funding so that you can provide the services on the ground that you know your families need while not violating the rules of what dollars can be spent where, and making sure that that all works at the appropriate seamless level? Again, putting the family at the center and not letting rules, regulations, or funding requirements, important as they are, but not letting them dictate which door somebody walks in or what services they're able to receive. Also important were anticipated challenges around getting agency buy-in from other partner agencies, as well as community, nonprofits and other stakeholders who would have a clear role in this. And others just really didn't know what challenges they might foresee. They were that new to this area. You can also see governance structure, sort of how do you manage this or organize this at a state level to really instill it and embed it in business as usual. And then others mentioned maybe getting legislative attention might be a challenge, figuring out where to start. And then gubernatorial attention was on there. Not very highly rated because I think those who were coming already had the support and the attention of their governors. So then what their emerging ideas were, just real briefly, we actually had one of the fellow, actually, it was from New Jersey, Aaron Fickner is his name, and he not only was a representative from Workforce Board, the Workforce Agency of New Jersey, for the New Jersey team, he's currently the chair of the National Association of Workforce Investment Chairs or Boards. And so he immediately got some great ideas what he could take back to his constituents and his workforce local investment board leaders around how to really engage and integrate workforce with TANF and 2Gen and childcare. So we already are very excited to move forward with him to think about how better he can engage his constituents about pulling all of those pieces together from the workforce WIOA angle. A lot of ideas, and we've heard with Utah around the interest in, family coaching, a case management model that puts families at the center, and what does a coaching model look like? And you've heard the details of what that looks like in Utah, and there was a lot of interest about Utah's model, and in general, how to do that on the ground, and what state policies or funding or support for training can really make that happen at the service delivery level as a way to really put families at the center of services. Again, the integrating financial. This is integrating financial empowerment, so asset development and other tools that can bolster the economic security of families. And so bringing that piece into the work, employment and wages is one thing and very important, but then how to help families manage their finances or make some investments and have the tools at their disposal that higher income families have as a way of managing the finances of their families. A lot of ideas around centralizing eligibility or doing presumptive eligibility for TANF, SNAP, and Medicaid. What would that look like at the state level to streamline those processes and better bring people into the eligibility of services that they're already eligible for, and then get them connected beyond that, not only to those benefits, but then other services that can help them with their child's needs, with their mental health needs, but certainly beginning with sort of integrated enrollment and eligibility, and Medicaid to play a large role in that. Many people were brainstorming about that. And then a few states, a lot of states actually, were mentioning the issue around homelessness and thinking about how they can adopt a cross-agency approach to homelessness, and thinking about how to target precariously housed families as well as already homeless families. A lot of homeless individuals are parts of families, and so how to get their children stabilized in school if they don't even have a home to come back to and do their homework. But basically understanding the whole family needs with a particular focus on homelessness was another idea and a strategy that folks were gloming onto. So then we asked them, well, what would you like more to learn about so that you can implement your ideas? And so at NGA, obviously, this was a question we asked so that we could think about the technical assistance that they might need from us. But I think I'm sure OFA and the Peer TA Network would be very interested to hear as well that they certainly want to figure out how to collaborate around particular policy areas. So how do you get stakeholder engagement? How do you collaborate across state agencies and bring the right people to the table? Certainly learning more about implementation and best practices. And again, we heard from Connecticut and Utah today. How can we better share those ideas? Certainly through webinars like this is a great way. But as folks are making progress in these areas to share these best practices, we're finding states really hunger for that kind of information. Data is really important. And again, you heard from Connecticut and Utah, the importance, that it played particularly in Utah in identifying where to even begin and what they should focus on. And so states really need information about how to integrate their data systems across agencies, how to share data, and then how to use those data to identify, who might be the best ones to focus on and target, both in terms of what their characteristics are or geographically, as Utah or Connecticut as well, and identifying where to locate their pilot programs. Again, getting buy-in from stakeholders, including the legislature and frontline workers, and that's where a training piece also comes in. Many of the folks also talked about how to better train their workers, not only if they were to take and adopt a more of a two-gen approach, but training in general and getting the frontline workers the support and the resources they need to do this work was a very critical operational issue that came up and folks are looking for information on. Again, blending and braiding funding, and the materials around messaging, how to share this information, message it to the legislature, to their senior state leaders about the promise of two-generation strategies for better serving these families more efficiently and more effectively. So I just want to briefly, I notice I have a couple minutes left, and I think I'll just end with this slide to say that with generous funding from 3 foundations, you can see at the bottom of your slide there, the NGA and the class, the Center for Law and Social Policy, are partnering to design and execute a 2-year technical assistance effort with a small number of competitively selected states around two-generation state strategies. So the goal of this project is to help states better align the parent and child-focused service delivery systems. What Steve was saying, it's really addressing the structure and the systems level of what two-generation could look like at the state level, with, of course, the ultimate goal of improving outcomes for both the adults and the children in low-income families. And so in terms of a timeline, and something I just want to make sure is on your radar screen, we will be releasing an RFA in June. Now, the state has to be the applicant. So I urge you now to work with your state leaders, and we need a letter from the governor, him or herself, to articulate their commitment to this. That will all be clear in the RFA, but it's states are eligible to apply to adopt a range of two-generation strategies. And again, the RFA will be clearer on what's included in that, but it really is going to be a broad net so that we can maximize learning about how we might do this at the state level. We'll select the states by September, and then the 2 years of technical assistance will begin soon after that over a variety of ways that we and other experts outside of NGA and CLAS can help the states, as well as learn from each other, learn about how they might want to execute the state plans that we will help them develop. So I think I will pause at that and turn it back over to folks at OFA.
Thank you. Wow, so much information. This is great. So now for our fourth and final polling question. So this is for the audience. Which component would you most like targeted technical assistance in, considering next steps for your own TANF Programs two-generation approach? Okay, so you can see, I can see that there's 64% of the folks in the audience. There's about 49 people are interested in technical assistance around economic support. So thank you very much for answering that question. At this time, I just want to thank our outstanding presenters who provided a wealth of important information that I'll use as we work with TANF families. We are now going to open up to the town hall portion of the webinar, which will give you an opportunity to ask your own questions of our speakers. Please submit your questions using the chat feature. And again, if you have a question for a specific presenter or state, please make sure that you let us know when you submit your question. I'll hand it over now to Monica.
Thanks, Carol. I'm not sure if I can see all the questions, so do you see if anyone has their hand raised or a question in the chat box or in the Q&A?
So our first question, it says, which states are currently receiving NGA Class GA?
I guess that's for me. This is Sharon. None yet. So this is really a brand spanking new effort. We are in the process of designing what this might look like. We're drafting the RFA, the request for applications. So take a look for that in June. And the idea is that we will select them by September.
Thanks, Sharon. And yeah, I certainly didn't see that question. So I don't know if Carol or if that was Jennifer or whoever. Is there another question from the audience?
Yes. We have three more. The first one is, does the state agency that applies to the RFA have to be the TANF lead state agency?
And this is back to me, I guess, Sharon at NGA. Not necessarily. Basically, we will ask you at the state to come to us with your best idea of which policy areas do you want to move forward, how do you want to coordinate at the state level, and then given what you want to do, your state team has to reflect that makeup. Again, other than the letter coming from the governor's office, his or her office, and committing his or her support, he or she will have to identify who are the, I think, up to 3 state leaders, from senior level officials who are tasked with moving this forward. So that will be up to the state to decide who is best, who those folks should be.
And can you go to the next question?
How can we find out who from our state attended the Utah conference?
I actually have a list. I could let you know, Tom. I wonder if there's a better way, because I don't know if other folks would probably have the same question. I'm not sure if we can share that list. Maybe there's some way I can follow up with OSA. Tom, let me do this. If anybody wants to email me separately at smcroder@nga.org, I can certainly let you know who from your particular state without sharing from all the other states. But then if we find out that it might make sense and people are okay with sharing that information, I can work with OSA to get folks that information.
Great. Our next question, what are some of the difficulties that have been identified when it comes to implementing 2-gen approaches?
We can have maybe Stephen and Tracy tackle that one, difficulties that have been experienced in implementing 2-gen, or Peter. So Connecticut, you want to take a swing at that first?
Sure, if I may. One of the difficulties that we've seen, I intimated, or I alluded to it rather, in my presentation, is the difficulty of realigning system around 2-gen policy. And really what that means is, what are the systems in place that we have in place now, either at our agency level, in our structural procurement level, that either help or hinder the work of supporting the different sites that are being piloted? And how do we differentiate between those structural changes that need to take place in order to help a pilot situation, and and those changes that need to take place to support the family as a structure? I think we know that in the state of Connecticut, much of our work around the family has been siloed among the agencies and among the services that impact children and that impact families, and that is and really the exposure that is occurring as a result of this new policy is really the challenge. One of the things that we found, for instance, when sites were, this wasn't a typical RFP process that we had in the state of Connecticut, because the sites were chosen for myriad reasons, with a focus on diversity, demographic, socioeconomic, and really community of learning. And ultimately, what we found was that a lot of these sites, in their engagement and in their plans for engaging among each other, were submitting proposals that looked very much like the way that we usually do business, but just either building upon the way business was done or exploiting existing methodology. And of course, part of this process has been in going back, teasing that out, figuring out how to realign collaboration so that it's truly 2-generational.
Great, thank you, Tracy.
Yeah, so we've learned a lot, I think, and have faced a number of challenges. I'll just quickly go over some of them that sometimes you can't anticipate. So our program focus on 2-gen also involves coordinating with caseworkers at different state agencies, and that brings to mind challenges with privacy laws, FERPA and HIPAA, just to name a couple. So that presents a barrier from us being able to coordinate with other state agencies for case management. I think we also have challenges with, just it was alluded to by Sharon, some of the federal funding streams and how those work and the requirements of those. Just to give one example, a family could be working with us through our family employment program and be a TANF eligible family, but they're also working with children and family services, and that results that may result in a child being removed from a home and then they are no longer eligible to receive services through our family employment program, which really is disruptive to the case management and disruptive to the family. I also think that shifting the mindset of our staff is a challenge and can't be understated of just how difficult that is. We are all very compliance focused, I believe, and must maintain that focus on compliance. But we also have to shift the mindset of our staff to focus on the family at the center. And that's complicated. And as CFO mentioned, for our agency, we are in a multi-month undertaking to try and help with that mindset through our comprehensive professional development and training.
Thanks to you both. I don't know if we might have time for one more, or Carol, if you have anything to wrap up with?
I think that we are ready to wrap up. Thank you, Monica. So just again, I want to thank everyone who participated in today's webinar, and thank you again to our expert presenters. There's great information. And I would like to ask the participants or the audience to please remember to provide your feedback on this webinar using the survey that will appear in a separate pop-up window when the webinar ends. And just a reminder again that a transcript and an audio recording of this webinar will be available shortly on the Peer TA Network website. It is at www.peerta.com. That's one word, .acf.hhs.gov. I'd like to hear from you about future webinar topics, so please send us your ideas by email to PeerTA. Again, that's one word. It's all lowercase letters, PeerTA@icfi.com. And finally, we ask that you help us expand our network, and we would really like to reach a greater number of people. So if you could help by directing your colleagues to our website, that would be great. And we look forward to your participation on future webinars. So everyone have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.